The 43rd floor of Holloway Tower did not sleep. Even at 11:15 on a Tuesday night, the lights in the executive corridor burned with the kind of cold, purposeful brightness that suggested the building itself never fully exhaled. Victoria Langston preferred it that way. She had spent 11 years building Holloway Systems into the kind of company that competitors whispered about with a mixture of admiration and fear, and she had done it by maintaining absolute command over every variable within her reach. The lights stayed on because she said so. The servers hummed because she had approved the cooling contracts herself. The security rotations changed every quarter because she had read 3 separate reports on pattern vulnerability and decided that predictability was the enemy of protection. She was walking the executive floor that night for no particular reason she would have admitted to anyone, not to her CFO, not to her personal assistant, not to her head of security, Lawrence Pruitt, who followed 3 steps behind her with the practiced silence of a man who had learned that his employer did not require commentary. Victoria sometimes called these walks atmospheric audits. Her board members called them, behind her back, Victoria being Victoria. Both descriptions were accurate. She was turning the corner near the glass-walled conference room, the large one with the mahogany table that seated 20 and a view of the city that had closed more deals than any slide deck when she stopped. A man was standing just outside the conference room door. He was in the gray uniform of the night cleaning crew. Dark pants, a collared shirt with the small Holloway Systems facilities patch on the left breast, a cart of supplies parked neatly against the far wall. He was perhaps 35, lean, with the particular stillness of someone entirely absorbed in a private task. He held a small, well-worn notebook, the spiral-bound kind you could buy for $2 at any pharmacy, and he was writing in it with the focused deliberateness of someone transcribing something important. Victoria did not move for 4 full seconds. She watched him write 3 lines, pause, look up at the wall, specifically at the ventilation grill above the conference room door, and then write 2 more lines. He had not heard her approach. He was too absorbed. His pen moved across the page with the efficiency of someone who had done this many times. "Pruitt," she said quietly. "Ma'am, who is that?" Lawrence Pruitt stepped up beside her, consulted his tablet. "Night crew. Name is Marcus Hill. On rotation for floors 40 through 45. Been with the facilities contractor for about 8 months. Why is he writing in a notebook outside my executive conference room?" Pruitt was quiet for a moment. "I don't know." Victoria studied Marcus Hill for another moment. He had moved slightly, shifting his position to look at the frame of the conference room door, the top corner specifically, where the door met the ceiling. He wrote something else. "Precise, economical strokes. Pull everything you have on him," she said. Her voice was level, measured, entirely without theater. By 8 tomorrow morning, she walked away before Pruitt could respond. Behind her, Marcus Hill continued writing, undisturbed, unaware that the most powerful person in the building had just decided he required investigation. The elevator doors closed, and Victoria faced her own reflection in the brushed steel. She was 51 years old, though most people guessed younger. Her hair was dark brown with silver threading through it that she had stopped fighting 2 years ago. She wore a charcoal blazer over a white shirt, and her expression, even now, alone, in the privacy of an empty elevator, did not fully relax. She thought about the notebook. "Gian Dierp doing Nierp." The phrase surfaced in English before Vietnamese, which was unusual. Corporate espionage. She dismissed the dramatic framing almost immediately. That kind of thing happened, yes, but it usually involved executives, disgruntled engineers, people with access to something worth selling. A janitor writing in a notebook outside a conference room was almost certainly nothing. She knew that, almost certainly. The Mercer acquisition was 9 days away, $8 billion, 3 years of preparation, and a non-disclosure agreement that covered a list of people so long it had required its own index. If any piece of that deal leaked to Meridian Group, their most aggressive competitor, the damage would not be measured in dollars alone. It would be measured in trust, which was a currency Victoria valued above all others, precisely because it could not be recovered once spent. She pressed the button for the parking garage. Almost certainly nothing. She would see what Pruitt found. Marcus Hill finished his notes at 11:47, and spent the next hour completing his assigned floors, with the methodical efficiency that had kept him employed across 3 different jobs, without a single complaint from any supervisor. He mopped the executive bathrooms, emptied the shredding bins, replaced the paper in the communal printer on 42, and rechecked the supply card inventory against his list. At 12:58 in the morning he clocked out, nodded to the security guard, at the side entrance, a young man named Dennis, who was reading something on his phone, and gave a distracted wave and walked to his car. It was a 2009 Honda Accord with a crack in the rear bumper from a parking lot incident 2 years ago that he had never gotten around to fixing because the money earmarked for it had gone to Ava's winter coat, and then to a dental bill, and then to a new water heater that had failed, catastrophically on a Sunday morning in February, and could not wait. The car started on the 3rd try, which was normal. Marcus let it warm up for 90 seconds, a habit left over from advice his father had given him about older engines that was probably outdated but felt like faithfulness. He drove 22 minutes through the empty city streets to the apartment building on Carver Street. It was a 5-story brick building that smelled like someone's dinner in the stairwell at all hours, and had a buzzer system that had worked intermittently since 2021. His unit was on the 3rd floor. He unlocked the door as quietly as possible. Ava's bedroom was just off the entrance hall, and stood for a moment in the dark. A small lamp was on in the living room. It was always on when he came home. He hung up his jacket, set his keys on the hook by the door, and checked the kitchen. On the counter was a plate covered with plastic wrap, 2 peanut butter sandwiches, a handful of crackers, and a note in 8-year-old handwriting that said, "Daddy, I made dinner. Love, Ava," with a drawing of what appeared to be a flower, or possibly an explosion. He was never entirely sure with her art. He sat down at the kitchen table and ate the sandwiches without turning on the overhead light. He had a ritual with the notebooks that he had never explained to anyone, because no one had asked, and explaining it would have required talking about the years at Grayfield, and what it had felt like to stop going, which was not a conversation he carried easily. He had been 21 years old when he left school. At 21, he had understood 3 things with the clarity that only that age provides. That he was good at this, that it mattered to him, and that life did not always accommodate the things that mattered to you. His mother had needed care. The grants had run out. He had made the choice that was available to him, and tried not to look at it too often afterward. Janet had understood. She was the one who had found his old engineering textbooks in a storage box 3 years into their marriage, and set them on the kitchen shelf like an argument. She never said, "You should finish." She just put the books where he could see them. He had read them some evenings while she watched television, and she would bring him tea without commenting on it. And that was one of the things he had loved most about her, that she understood some things were better held quietly than discussed. After she died, he kept the books on the shelf. He did not read them as often, but they were there. The notebook was still in his jacket pocket. He retrieved it and set it on the table beside the plate. It was his 4th notebook of this kind. He had filled 3 others over the past 14 months, all of them devoted to the same ongoing project. He had not named it. It was simply the thing he did during the slow parts of his shift, the hour between 2 and 3 in the morning when the floors were done, and he was waiting for his next task rotation. He would find a place where he could see a mechanical feature of the building, a vent, a junction box, a thermostat panel, a section of exposed conduit, and he would think about it. Really think about it. Marcus had spent 2 years at Grayfield State studying mechanical engineering before his mother's illness had brought him home, and the money had run out, and life had made other arrangements. He had not returned to school. He had married Janet, and they had Ava. And Janet had gotten sick when Ava was 3 and was gone by the time she turned 5, and somewhere in all of that, the part of Marcus that had once stayed up until 2 in the morning reading thermodynamic theory, for the pleasure of it, had gone quiet but not away. It was still there. It came out in the notebooks. The notation he had made tonight outside the executive conference room was a continuation of something he had started 3 weeks ago. The building's HVAC load distribution on the upper floors was inefficient in a way that was costing the company real money. He had traced it to a mismatch between the original system design and the thermal load introduced by the server room expansion that had been added to floor 41 sometime in the last 4 years. The 2 systems were fighting each other, Any mechanical engineer looking at the setup would see it. But the people who walked these floors every day saw clean surfaces and working elevators, and that was enough. He had drafted a summary of his findings 2 months ago and sent it to the facility's management email address listed on the employee portal. He had received an automated response. "Thank you for your message. Our team will review and respond within 5 to 7 business days." No one had responded. He had sent it again 3 weeks later. Same automated reply. He closed the notebook and looked at the drawing on the note. Flower or explosion. He decided it was a flower this time. From the hallway came the small sound of feet on linoleum. Ava appeared in the kitchen doorway in her pajamas, the ones with the small stars on them, faded from many washings. She was 8 years old and had her mother's eyes, which Marcus could look at for long stretches without it hurting. And then sometimes, unpredictably, it would hurt a great deal. "You're supposed to be asleep," he said. I heard the door. She came and climbed into the chair across from him, pulling her knees up. She looked at the notebook. "Did you write more stuff tonight?" "A little." "About the building?" "About the building." She considered this. "Do you think they'll ever actually read it?" Marcus looked at his daughter. She was 8 years old and had already developed a skepticism about institutions that he found both impressive and faintly heartbreaking. "I don't know," he said honestly. "You're really smart, Daddy," she said, with the absolute certainty of someone who has never had a reason to doubt it. "I wish they knew." He reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "Go to bed, Avsurda." She went. He sat at the table a while longer, not reading, not writing. The lamp in the living room cast a yellow circle on the wall. Outside on Carver Street, a bus went by. Lawrence Pruitt's report landed in Victoria's inbox at 7:52 the next morning, 8 minutes before her deadline. She read it at her desk with a cup of coffee that she did not touch. The report was thorough. Pruitt was nothing, if not thorough, and it contained the following. Marcus Elijah Hill, age 36, formerly of Delwood, a suburb 40 minutes east of the city, single parent to one child, Ava, age 8. His wife, Janet Hill, had died of an aggressive form of breast cancer 3 years prior. He held positions at 3 employers simultaneously: Halloway Systems, facilities, contractor, a delivery service, and a part-time repair technician for a small electronics shop on the west side. His background check was clean. No criminal history, 2 parking tickets, 1 paid, 1 still outstanding for $12. He had attended Grayfield State for mechanical engineering, 2 years, no degree completed. There was a camera capture at the bottom. Marcus in his gray uniform, taken from a security feed. He was pushing the supply cart, looking straight ahead. His expression was not furtive. It was simply closed, in the way of people who have learned that their inner life is not of interest to those around them. Victoria set the report down. She picked it up again and read the part about the mechanical engineering enrollment. Then she called Pruitt. "The notebook," she said. "Have we looked at it?" "Not directly. We've confirmed from camera footage that he's been writing in it on approximately 47 separate occasions over the last 8 months. Always in proximity to mechanical systems vents, electrical panels, that kind of thing. Never in proximity to computer terminals or data access points. Never inside any restricted area. Always near mechanical systems." "Yes." Victoria was quiet for a moment. "Have you spoken to him?" "Not yet. I was waiting for your direction." "Hold off," she said. She did not fully understand her own hesitation. The rational analysis suggested the man was harmless. The notebook was almost certainly exactly what it appeared to be: some kind of personal documentation, probably related to the building's infrastructure, which would explain the mechanical proximity pattern. There was no evidence of data access. There was no evidence of contact with any competitor. But the Mercer acquisition closed in 9 days. "Keep him on the monitor list," she said. "I want to know if anything changes." She hung up and looked at the city through the floor-to-ceiling windows of her corner office, 43 floors below. The street was full of morning commuters, their shapes small and purposeful from this height. The building breathed around her the quiet whoosh of climate control, the faint vibration of elevators moving through the shaft, the hum that was so constant she had stopped hearing it years ago. The monitor list meant that someone in the security office was logging Marcus's movements in a spreadsheet. Time in, time out. Floor visited. Duration. Lawrence Pruitt reviewed it each morning and sent Victoria a brief summary that she read at her desk with the same expression she brought to quarterly earnings. Attentive, unreadable, drawing no conclusions she wasn't yet ready to share. The summaries were consistent. Marcus Hill arrived at 10:15 each evening. He cleaned his assigned floors methodically, beginning at the top and working down. He spent approximately 90 minutes per floor, which was slightly longer than the contracted standard, but well within acceptable variance. The quality assessments consistently showed his floors as among the highest rated in the building. He took one break per shift, always at approximately 2 in the morning, always in one of the stairwell landings where there was a window. He ate whatever he had brought in a small container, read from a paperback he rotated every few weeks, and then went back to work. The notebook came out during the slow periods, always near something mechanical. Victoria had Pruitt pull the building's maintenance work order logs going back 2 years. She looked for anything filed by night staff. There was nothing from Marcus. He had not filed any work orders. She looked at the general facilities inbox logs that IT had been able to reconstruct. She found his 2 emails, archived under a folder a junior staff member had labeled MISC, Vendor, Other, and never revisited. She sat with that for longer than she expected. 4 days later, a mechanical engineer named Greg Halstead from the facilities team stopped Victoria in the second-floor corridor with an expression of genuine bewilderment. "Miss Langston, do you have 60 seconds?" She gave him 45, which he used to show her a printout. "I found this in the system. Someone submitted it through the general facilities email 6 weeks ago. And again, 3 weeks after that. I only saw it because I was clearing the inbox backlog." He handed her 2 pages of densely written technical analysis. It was handwritten, then photographed and emailed. The handwriting was clear and precise, the kind developed by someone who writes a great deal. The analysis concerned the HVAC system on the upper floors. It identified a specific load imbalance, traced it to the server room expansion on 41, and proposed 3 solutions in ascending order of cost and effectiveness, with rough efficiency estimates for each. Victoria read both pages. She read them again. "Who submitted this?" she asked, though she already knew. "A Marcus Hill. He's on the night cleaning crew." She handed the pages back. "What's your assessment of the analysis?" Halstead looked slightly uncomfortable. "Honestly, it's correct. He's identified something we missed. The middle solution he proposes it would take maybe 3 weeks to implement, and the efficiency gains he's projecting are probably conservative. We could be looking at real savings, significant ones." Victoria said nothing for a moment. "Thank you, Greg." She walked to her office and stood at the window for a long time. The catastrophe arrived on a Wednesday night, with 7 days remaining before the Mercer closing. Victoria was still in the building at 10:30. She was always still in the building reviewing the final due diligence documents when the alarm began. It was not the fire alarm. It was the server alarm, a lower, more insistent tone that the facilities team had installed 2 years ago at the recommendation of their infrastructure consultant, and which Victoria had never actually heard triggered in a real emergency until now. She was in the hallway within 90 seconds. The executive floor was suddenly full of urgent movement. Her head of IT, Daniel Reeves, was on the phone with the data center team. 2 facilities technicians were running toward the server room on 41. The assistant who handled after-hours building management was pale and speaking very quickly into her own phone. "What is it, Victoria?" "Thermal event in the primary server cluster. We've got cooling system failure on 41. The load balancer is compensating, but it's already running hot, and if the primary cluster goes down, the Mercer documents everything. All of it. Encrypted off-site backups exist, but we'd be looking at 6 to 8 hours of reconstruction, and some of the annotated working files don't have clean backups." He paused. "We're trying to get the building's cooling engineer on the phone, but he's not picking up." Victoria moved toward the elevator. She arrived at 41 to find 3 people standing in front of an open electrical panel, looking at it with the expressions of people who understood that something was very wrong but not what to do about it. The server room beyond the glass door was visible through the thermal monitor, 3 of the 8 racks, showing orange on the heat display, one edging toward red. The cooling unit on the far wall was making a sound it should not have been making. And then Marcus Hill walked through the stairwell door with his cart. He stopped when he saw the group. He looked at the panel. He looked at the server room display through the glass. Something in his face changed. The settled, closed expression opened slightly, like a window being raised. "What happened?" he asked. "Cooling failure," said one of the technicians. A young woman named Priya, who Victoria had seen around but did not know well. "The primary loop dropped pressure about 20 minutes ago. We think." Marcus had already moved to the panel. He stood in front of it for perhaps 4 seconds, scanning it the way a person scans a familiar page of text, not searching, just reading. "This is the load imbalance issue," he said quietly. He was not speaking to anyone in particular. He was thinking out loud. The secondary circuit's been compensating for months. Tonight he turned to Priya. "Is the manual bypass switch for the supplemental cooling on this panel, or the one outside the server room?" Priya stared at him. "The one outside the server room." "But I need someone to go activate it. Now." "Manual override. 3rd switch from the left on the lower bank. Hold it for 10 seconds and release." He looked around the group. "Can someone do that?" No one moved for a half second that felt much longer. Then Priya went. Marcus turned back to the panel. His hands moved across 2 switches in sequence. Then paused. Then moved to a 3rd. He was reading the system labels, but he was also reading something beyond them, the logic of the system, its internal architecture. Victoria arrived at the threshold. "What is he doing?" said Daniel, who had followed her. "I have no idea," Victoria said, but she did not stop him. From behind the server room glass, the thermal display began to shift. One of the orange racks edged back toward yellow. Then another. Priya came back through the door. "Done. Give it 90 seconds, Marcus said. He had not turned around. He was watching the panel gauges. The room was silent, except for the misfiring cooling unit, which after 40 seconds began to slow its aberrant sound. And then, with a cycling groan, stabilized. The thermal display. 4 racks yellow, 4 racks green. The red was gone. Marcus stepped back from the panel. He looked at his hands for a moment, then let them drop to his sides. "The cooling system will hold for tonight," he said. He finally turned to face the room. He registered Victoria for the first time, and something careful moved through his expression, not fear, but awareness. "You'll need a proper repair before the next heat cycle. I can write up exactly what failed and what needs to be replaced." The room was absolutely silent. Victoria looked at Marcus Hill. She looked at the stabilized thermal display. She looked at the panel he had diagnosed in under a minute. She thought about Greg Halstead's face when he had said, "It's correct. He's identified something we missed." "How did you know what to do?" she asked. Marcus reached into the chest pocket of his gray uniform and produced the notebook. He held it out to her. "I've been looking at this system for about a year," he said. "I noticed the imbalance 8 months ago. I sent the summary to facilities twice." A pause. No one responded. Victoria took the notebook. She read it in her office while the building settled back into its normal breathing. It took her 1 hour and 20 minutes to read the 4 months of notes that were relevant to the HVAC system. She was not a mechanical engineer. Her background was in finance, and before that, economics, but she was a precise and analytical reader, and what she encountered in those pages was unmistakably the work of a trained mind operating on a problem it found genuinely interesting. Marcus Hill had not been taking notes on corporate meetings. He had not been documenting anything that happened inside the conference rooms he cleaned. He had been studying the infrastructure of the building itself, its electrical load patterns, its cooling inefficiencies, the small and cumulative failures of a system that had been modified over the years without anyone sitting down to think about the whole. The notebook was full of calculations. Not elaborate ones. He did not have a computer with him, just the notebook and a pencil, but the kind of calculations that demonstrated a person who understood what they were calculating, who could hold the logic of a system in their head and turn it over. In the margin of one entry, written small, submitted to facilities, email 2x, no response. We'll keep documenting in case useful later. In case useful later, Victoria set the notebook down on her desk. She looked at it. It was worn along the spine, the cover soft from handling, the pages slightly warped from sitting in a jacket pocket for months. She thought about a 23-year-old version of herself, sitting in a conference room, as the only woman in a room of 12 people, presenting an analysis she had worked on for 6 weeks. She thought about the partner who had not looked at her during the entire presentation. She thought about the feeling of having something real to offer, and no mechanism by which to offer it. She reached for the phone and called Daniel Reeves. "The analysis in the notebook," she said. "The HVAC system notes. I want Greg Halstead to review them in detail and give me a full assessment by Friday morning. I want actual numbers. Of course, should I? And I want Marcus Hill's contact information." She went herself. She did not send Pruitt or an assistant or a lawyer with a formal letter. She drove to the address in the facilities file on a Thursday evening, parked on Carver Street, and sat in her car for a moment, looking at the brick building with its buzzer panel and the light in one of the third-floor windows. She was not certain why she felt it was important to come herself, perhaps because anything less seemed insufficient. The buzzer worked on the second attempt. She climbed the stairs and knocked on the door of Unit 3C. Marcus opened the door in a plain gray t-shirt and sweatpants, holding a dish towel. He looked at her the way you look at something you were not expecting. Behind him, the apartment was small and warm, and cluttered with the particular character of a place that is fully inhabited. Shoes by the door. A child's artwork taped to the wall. Books stacked on a table, a lamp with a slightly crooked shade. "Miss Langston," he said. "Mr. Hill." She paused. "I'm sorry to come to your home. I should have called. It's fine." He did not move for a moment. And then he stepped back. "Come in." She came in. The apartment smelled like something cooking onions and something else, something warm. A child's backpack was on the floor near the couch. On the small dining table, textbooks and a pencil case and a sheet of math homework, half completed. "Ava's doing her homework in her room," Marcus said. "She'll be done in a bit." Victoria looked at the artwork on the wall. There were perhaps 20 pieces, taped up carefully at a child's eye-level drawings and paintings, and a few that appeared to be collages made of colored paper and magazine clippings. One of them showed a figure with a mop, and next to it, in careful 8-year-old printing, "My daddy." She looked at it for a longer moment than she intended. "The assessment came back today," she said, turning to Marcus. "From Greg Halstead on my facilities team. He ran the numbers on your HVAC analysis." Marcus was watching her steadily. He had put down the dish towel. "The efficiency improvement you projected," she said. "He says it's actually conservative by his estimate. We could be looking at close to $400,000 a year in energy costs alone, once the system is properly reconfigured. More, if we implement the second and third solutions you outlined." Marcus said nothing. He was listening. "I also looked into the emails you sent," she said. "They went to a general inbox that's monitored by a junior member of the facilities team who had no way to recognize what he was reading. I'm not saying that's an excuse. I'm saying I wanted to understand what happened." She paused. "I owe you an apology, Mr. Hill." "For what specifically?" His voice was even, but not cold. "For assuming you were a threat when I saw you writing in that corridor. For the 4 days, I had you under enhanced security monitoring, instead of simply asking you what you were working on." She held his gaze. "And for the culture at my company, that meant your emails went unread for 6 weeks because they came from a facilities address instead of an engineering address." A long pause. From the hallway came the sound of a door opening, and then a small person appeared in the entrance to the living room. Ava Hill, in a striped, long-sleeved shirt, looking at Victoria with frank curiosity. "Who's she?" Ava asked Marcus. "Someone from Daddy's work." Ava looked at Victoria more carefully. "Are you the lady in charge?" "I am," Victoria said. Ava processed this. Daddy sent you emails about the building, she said. He told me. He said no one wrote back. They didn't, Victoria said. That was a mistake we made. Ava seemed satisfied by the directness of this. She looked at her father. Told you, Daddy. You should have gone in person. Go finish your homework, Marcus said. And there was something in his voice that was almost a laugh, though he did not let it fully arrive. Ava disappeared. Victoria looked at Marcus. He was looking at the hallway where his daughter had been standing. Ava disappeared. Victoria stood for a moment in the small living room and looked around it with the eyes of someone trying to see something accurately rather than through the lens of their own expectations. She had been in a great many apartments in her life early in her career, in her 20s. She had lived in places not unlike this one. Smaller. Maybe. She had not thought about those apartments in a long time. The textbooks on the dining table were a mix. Ava's school materials, and, beneath them, a stack that clearly belonged to Marcus, an engineering mathematics text, a worn introduction to thermodynamics, a library book on building systems integration with a return sticker from the Westfield branch. He was already studying. Before the university enrollment. Before anyone had offered him anything, he had been doing it on his own, in the margins of 3 jobs and single parenthood, because stopping entirely was not something he had been willing to do. She thought about the automated reply. Thank you for your message. Our team will review and respond within 5 to 7 business days. He had read that reply twice and gone back to work. I have a proposal I'd like to make, Victoria said. Not tonight necessarily, but I'd like you to consider it. 2 days later, Victoria called a meeting of her full executive team. There were 14 people in the room. Her CFO, her COO, her heads of technology, operations, legal, marketing, HR, people who collectively managed a company worth several $1 billion and who were not accustomed to being surprised in this particular conference room. Marcus Hill was not in the room yet. Victoria stood at the head of the table and said, Before we begin, I want to tell you what happened last Wednesday. She told them. All of it her suspicion when she saw Marcus writing in the corridor, the 4 days of monitoring, the security report, the notebook. She told them what he had done when the server systems failed. She told them what Greg Halstead's assessment had found. She watched their faces. The reason his emails went unread, she said, is that we have built a system in which ideas are filtered by the title of the person who sends them before anyone evaluates whether the idea itself has merit. I was part of that system. I built parts of it, in fact, because I believed that structure and hierarchy were how you maintained quality control. She paused. I was wrong, not about structure, but about where I drew the line. Her head of operations, a careful man named Frank Yardley, who had been with the company 9 years and almost never spoke in full executive meetings without being asked, said, What are you proposing? I'm proposing we correct what can be corrected, Victoria said. And I'm proposing we bring Marcus Hill in to talk about how. She had Marcus brought in. He came in his work clothes he had not been given advance notice long enough to change, and she thought afterward that this was probably good, that the gray uniform in the mahogany conference room said something that needed to be said without words. He sat at the table, and Victoria, still standing, said, Mr. Hill, in front of this team, I want to apologize. I misjudged your intentions based on assumptions I should have examined more carefully. I want to correct that now. The room was very quiet. I'm offering you a formal consulting position in infrastructure engineering. The scope would focus initially on the HVAC project you've already analyzed, but the role is intended to expand based on your capabilities. We would also cover the cost of completing your engineering degree at whatever institution you choose, with full scheduling flexibility around your studies. She paused. I recognize this doesn't undo what happened, but it's what I can offer. Marcus had been listening with the same quality of stillness she had noticed in that first corridor, entirely present, entirely contained. I have one condition, he said. The room shifted slightly. Victoria waited. I want an open channel, Marcus said. Not for me specifically. For anyone in this building who sees something that could be improved and has no way to say so, maintenance workers, building staff. People who are in this building every night but whose names you don't know. He looked around the table. I spent 8 months trying to tell you something that could have prevented Wednesday's incident. I'm not the only person in this building with something useful to say. I'm just the one whose notebook you finally read. Silence. Frank Yardley, the careful man who rarely spoke, said quietly, "He's right." Victoria looked at Marcus. "Done," she said. The HVAC reconfiguration took 3 weeks and came in slightly under Marcus's cost estimate. The annual savings in the first year were $412,000. Greg Halstead wrote up the project for the company's internal engineering newsletter and cited Marcus's original analysis in full, with attribution. The open channel program that Victoria established did not have an elegant name and did not require much infrastructure. It was, at its core, a direct email address monitored daily by 2 people with actual authority to route ideas to the right departments. Within the first month, 11 substantive suggestions had come in from building staff, cleaning crews, cafeteria workers, and security personnel. 4 of them were implemented in some form. One of them, a routing change suggested by a security guard named Kenneth, who had been with the building for 14 years, turned out to save approximately $80,000 in overtime costs annually. Victoria announced the program at an all-staff meeting, in person, without slides. She explained what had led to it. She did not softening the language. Marcus began his formal consulting work the week after the Mercer acquisition closed without incident. He negotiated his own contract, a process he had prepared for with the same methodical care he brought to everything. And he arrived for his first meeting with a new notebook, same spiral-bound kind, purchased at the same pharmacy, $2. He enrolled in the evening engineering program at Stanton University in the spring semester. He kept his delivery work for 3 months, then stopped when the consulting income made it unnecessary. He kept the part-time repair work at the electronics shop, not because he needed the money, but because he liked it. Ava, in the spring, brought in a show-and-tell item for her class. A photograph of her father, standing in front of the Holloway Tower building system's schematic. She introduced it to her class as, "My dad figured out why the building was broken, and now they're fixing it." It would be wrong to say everything changed after that. Victoria Langston did not become a different person. She remained exacting, precise, difficult, in the way that people who set very high standards for themselves and others are always somewhat difficult. She still walked the executive floors at odd hours, though she now occasionally stopped to speak to whoever she encountered. Marcus did not become easy in ways he had not been easy before. He was still quiet, still contained, still more comfortable with systems than with rooms full of people. He still found the administrative parts of his new role bewildering in ways he managed through the same notebook habit, writing down what he needed to do, then doing it, then checking it off. They worked together for several months before they had a real conversation that wasn't about infrastructure. It happened in the break room on 41 at 9:40 in the evening. After a long project review that had run past everyone's expected end time, everyone else had left. Victoria was pouring coffee she didn't need. Marcus was writing something in his notebook. "You never told anyone about the emails," she said. "Not an accusation, an observation. I told my daughter, but not anyone at the company. Not a manager, not HR." He considered this. What would I have said? "I sent you an email about the air conditioning and no one responded?" They would have apologized and done nothing, and I would have made myself visible in a way that tends not to go well. Victoria sat down across from him with her unnecessary coffee. "What do you mean, tends not to go well?" He looked at her for a moment. It was a measuring look, not unfriendly. "I'm a single father working 3 jobs in a building I don't own," he said, "cleaning floors for people who don't know my name. When someone like me makes themselves visible without being invited to, it doesn't usually go the way it went last month." He paused. I had the notebook. I was documenting everything. I figured eventually something would happen that would make the documentation relevant. He glanced at the notebook. I just didn't expect it to happen the way it did. Victoria was quiet for a moment. That's a very long play, she said. I'm good at long plays, he said. I've been playing them my whole life. She looked at her coffee cup. I'm sorry it took an emergency. He looked at her directly. The same steady gaze. I am too, he said. But here we are. It was not a comfortable conversation. It was not meant to be. But it was honest, which in Victoria's experience was rarer and more valuable than comfortable. 12 months after the night the servers nearly burned, Holloway Systems held its annual company meeting in the large ground-floor auditorium. All 800 employees in person, the rest joining remotely. Victoria spoke for 20 minutes about the company's performance, the Mercer integration, the infrastructure improvements. Then she introduced a new segment of the program, a speaker from inside the company. Marcus stood at the podium in a dark suit that he had bought 3 weeks before and practiced speaking in for exactly that reason, because he was not vain but he understood preparation. He looked out at 800 people. He spoke for 11 minutes. He did not use notes, because the things he wanted to say did not require them. He talked about what it was like to work in a place without being seen by it, to spend hours every week in a building, to know its rhythms and its failures, to have something real to contribute, and no mechanism for contribution. He did not say this with bitterness. He said it the way you describe a thing you have understood thoroughly. He talked about his daughter, and the note she left him on the counter, and the lamp that was always on when he came home. He talked about the notebook, not this one, the one from before, the worn one that Victoria had read in her office at 1 in the morning. He held it up briefly, and then set it down. The hardest thing, he said, was not the poverty. I knew how to manage that. The hardest thing was being invisible. It is a particular kind of loneliness, to be present somewhere every day, and to know that your presence registers as furniture, as something that maintains the space but does not belong in it. He looked out at the auditorium. What happened here a year ago didn't fix that problem everywhere. I know that. I'm one person in one building. But something real changed here. And I think real changes have to start somewhere. He paused. They have to start with someone deciding to look at the person holding the mop, instead of looking past them. He looked down at the podium for a moment. Talent does not always wear expensive clothes, he said. Sometimes it wears a gray uniform. Sometimes it stays late, not because it's paid to, but because it cares about the place it's in. Sometimes it sends emails that go unread for 6 weeks. A pause. The question is not whether that talent exists. It's whether you have built a place that can find it. In the front row, Victoria Langston sat with her hands in her lap. She was not an emotional person in the public sense. She did not cry at company meetings, had not cried at company meetings in the 11 years she had been running this one. But there was something in her expression that people in the nearby seats noticed and later described, in different ways, as like she was seeing something clearly that she hadn't seen clearly before. Ava was not at the meeting. She was in school, where she belonged. But Marcus had told her about it the night before, sitting at the kitchen table with the crooked shaded lamp on, and she had listened carefully and then said, "Are you going to be nervous?" "A little." "You shouldn't be," she said. "You already know what you're going to say." "How do you know that?" She pointed at the notebook on the table. "Because you've been writing it for 2 years." He looked at the notebook. She was right. Everything he wanted to say was already there, in 4 spiral-bound volumes filled with calculations and observations and, occasionally, a small note in the margin that was not about the building at all, just something that had occurred to him, sitting in a quiet corridor at 3 in the morning, that seemed worth writing down. Marcus walked off the stage to a standing ovation, which made him uncomfortable, in the way all direct attention made him uncomfortable, not because he was unconfident, but because he had spent so long in rooms where he was expected not to be noticed, that being the center of a room still required active adjustment. He nodded once, found the exit stairs, and stood in the stairwell for 3 minutes before rejoining the crowd. He was intercepted near the back of the auditorium by Kenneth, the security guard whose routing suggestion had saved the company $80,000 in overtime costs. Kenneth was a broad man in his late 50s, with a carefully trimmed beard and the unhurried manner of someone who had seen a great deal and chosen patience as his primary response to most of it. "Good talk," Kenneth said. "Thank you." You said what needed to be said. He paused. I've been in this building 14 years. First time I've been in this auditorium for anything other than a fire drill. Marcus looked at him. That change now? Kenneth considered. Maybe. We'll see if the thing holds. He was not cynical. His voice carried the particular quality of someone who has learned to distinguish between announcements and actions, and who reserves judgment for long enough to see which one actually arrives. But somebody's paying attention now who wasn't before. That's real. It is, Marcus said. They stood together for a moment. Two men in a building that had not noticed either of them for most of its recent history. Your daughter know you did this? Kenneth asked. She'll know tonight. Good. He nodded once, the way people nod when they mean something with more weight than the gesture suggests, and walked away. Later that afternoon, after the meeting had ended and the auditorium had emptied out, Victoria found herself on the 43rd floor for no particular reason. She stood in the corridor outside the executive conference room and looked at the ventilation grill above the door. She had walked past this grill approximately 8,000 times. She had never looked at it. She looked at it now. It was a standard commercial grill. Aluminum, 17 inches wide, slightly misaligned to the left. Not enough to affect function, but enough to notice if you were looking. She wondered how long it had been misaligned. She wondered what else she walked past every day without seeing. She stood there for a moment in the empty corridor. She thought about Kenneth, the security guard who had worked in this building for 14 years and had been to the auditorium only for fire drills. She thought about Priya, the young facilities technician who had gone without hesitation to activate the manual bypass because a man in a gray uniform had told her to, because in a crisis you respond to clarity regardless of the uniform wearing it. She thought about Greg Halstead's face when he had said it's correct, the slight discomfort of a professional man acknowledging that he had missed something that someone outside his professional category had found. She thought about all the notebooks that were never read. Then she took out her phone and sent a message to Greg Halstead. Can you find out if that grill outside the executive conference room needs adjustment? It was a small thing, but she had learned, this past year, that small things were often where the real work began.